And now, as always, it is a great pleasure to ask Maya Macklin to come forward to do our meditation and our message.
So I have introduced this movement meditation to you before. Let me get my hair out of the way here. Sherry doesn't have as much trouble with the hair as I do. And I'd like to do it again because it's nice to get people embodied and here, especially, well, I'll say this probably in the summer, I'll say it's so warm, we want to do this with the cold outside, we'd like to do this. So I'll invite you, and there's different ways you could do the movement meditation. You can simply sit and watch others do this and do it in your own mind. You can sit and do some of the arm pieces, or you can stand and as you're able and do this together. You'll need about this much room between the person next to you, because at one point we do this. I'm gonna walk somebody. And I'll say this again, that my spiritual mentor, Angelou, taught me this. She spent her lifetime, she herself was Indigenous, studying the wisdom of Indigenous people. And so I'll do this first just to tell you where some of this comes from. The beginning comes from the Inuit people of the North, and it goes, this is a good day to fly. This is a good day to die. And I do this in the morning, and the flying is setting your intention for the day. The dying is letting go of something that you may be dealing with that it'd be good to let go of in order to make that intention. And then the second part comes from East Africa. It is a good day to stand in our long, tall bodies, so we can go deep, deep into our roots. And the deep into our roots is also honoring our ancestors. It's honoring Mother Earth, but also the roots of our ancestors, both our ancestors family-wise, but also our spiritual ancestors, those people who have taught us. And then the last part is probably Celtic, mixed in with a little bit of the folks from northern Spain, the Basque area. It goes like this. It's a step forward, for we are a strong, soft, and subtle creature. So we are a strong, soft, and subtle creature. So we'll do that together twice and just participate in however you want to. And then we'll do the last time in silence. Okay. It is a good day to fly. It is a good day to die. It is a good day to stand in our long, tall bodies so we can go deep, deep into our roots. For we are a strong, soft, and subtle creature. Just a deep breath, letting go of whatever we need to let go of, kind of let those shoulders come down a little bit more. Yeah. It is a good day to fly. It is a good day to die. It is a good day to stand in our long, tall bodies so we can go deep, deep into our roots. For we are a strong, soft, and soft. You see you. As part of the meditation, I'll just offer a common prayer. Gracious Spirit of love and life, we gather here in gratitude for this opportunity to be together, to have the freedom to gather and worship as we may. We gather with hope and concern for our country, asking all those who may be suffering in mind, body, and spirit in these times that they find comfort. And let us just envision our globe, our planet Earth, and surrounding it with warmth and light, the richness of darkness and shadows, and all that takes it to become imbalance. Again, we remember all beings who may be suffering in mind, body, and spirit. Allowing our compassion first for ourselves, but then to spread outward to encircle this globe with love, with compassion, with courage. May the breath of life continue to nourish us. May the breath of life of this planet continue to cycle in its way. So may it be. Amen. Blessed be. Shalom. Salam. Amen. The hammer. So I've got new contact lenses that are not going to remain my contact lenses because, yeah, it's weird. Neither one of these works for the distance, but I think I'm going to go with this. I have a difficult prescription. I started wearing glasses when I was 3. So now I wear contacts with long distance, and they didn't quite get it matched right this time around. I'm going to begin with a reading from the Bible, from Job 28. Have you entered the storehouses of the snow? Or have you seen the treasures of the hail? From whose womb did the ice come forth? And who has given birth to the frost of heaven? The waters become hard like stone, and the face of the deep is frozen. It just seemed appropriate for today. Now, while most of us have dealt with some of the challenges, or maybe all of us, of the wintry weather these past weeks, I also know that we have been in awe at times, mesmerized by our Mother Earth and the stunning, bracing beauty that has come with the snow. And so here we are, February 1st, a time of Imbolc. February 1st. In the pagan tradition, Celtic, Imbolc is Gaelic actually for the stirring, it means in the belly. And like a woman who is pregnant, it's like seeing the earth pregnant, stirring with new life. This is when in pagan, it's right between winter solstice and the spring equinox. It's called the cross quarter. And so it was a great time of celebration within the pagan communities. The one I know most is the Celtic tradition. And it was a time that the goddess Brigid was honored, and she was about light, about learning, about poetry. And so this is a time that you'll also find in the Christian tradition, which often adopted some of the pagan traditions to make their Candlemas. Some of you have heard of that. And it's the same thing. In bulk, you had candles and you would process, and now in particularly the Catholic tradition, Candlemas is a time of processing with candles. There's now a Saint Brigid instead of the goddess Brigid. But I think they're all one. They are all one for me. And it is also a time that we simply celebrate that there are stirrings of life out there beneath the snow, beneath the ice. And it is so good to remember. I put in the newsletter, and I did tell that to Sherry. I go, you guys have a really good newsletter. I mean, you go through that and you know everything that's going on, like here and in the world. And I did. I loved every video I watched. And I'm going to assume that everybody else has read and looked at the videos and everything else. So And it is a time when so much is going on in a country as we are now. So here we are, month of February. January was tumultuous with everything that has been going on. With the protests, if you read the newsletter, our UUA president was arrested in Washington, D.C. for protesting. Lots of UUs gathered in Minneapolis. And really wanting to retain the right to make our voices heard. And that is not partisan at all. And so here we are in that time. And I know some people come to church wanting to hear more about that. And other people are like, I read the newsletter, I've been watching the news, I'm good. So I try to balance that in the pulpit. So today I give a nod to Groundhog's Day, the second, in a sermon exploring the shadow of human nature and the power of our love in our lives. For those of you who may not be familiar with it, the shadow is that aspect of ourselves that we often suppress as individuals and sometimes as a society, yet which we too often find ourselves unpacking it in the face of difficulties and structures of evil. As Unitarian Universalists, we spiritual seekers center love as our guide, as this church does. Love is the spirit of our church. Downstairs on the really cool silver plaque, God is love. God is love. The poet Maya Angelou said, we unaccustomed to courage, exiles from delight, live coiled in shells of loneliness until love leaves its high holy temple and comes into our sight to liberate us into life. I feel like that's part of what we do when we come here to worship. And in the opening words today, to focus on that, to bring our focus to one thing and not myriad other things. Now, I said we are in the cross quarter of the between winter solstice and the spring equinox. And I was thinking about winter solstice and I couldn't remember what I did this year to celebrate. And then I remembered what happened. So over a month ago on winter solstice, I had received a call from one of our elderly neighbors' adult daughters. She knew my spouse and I helped out our neighbor in all types of ways, and she called concerned because she could not reach her dad, who was in his 90s, on the phone. It was about 8:30 p.m. that cold night. I couldn't get my neighbor to answer the door, and I was pounding on it, but I also know that he had significant hearing loss. I'd kind of been through part of this scenario before. So I was speaking to the daughter on the phone who told me that the secret key had been moved. So I found myself outside digging in the frozen dirt on winter solstice, looking for a key, which has its own metaphors. And I luckily found it. I entered my neighbor's house with a flashlight. And while searching for the lights to turn on, I had turned my beam of my flashlight into one of the rooms. I'd forgotten that my neighbor liked to collect figures of the Buddha, all different sizes. He does not consider himself Buddhist. He just likes Buddha statues. When the beam of my flashlight hit nearly 20 Buddhist statues stored in the dark room, it cast Buddhist shadows all over the wall, and I was standing there momentarily mesmerized by the shadows. And my grip on my flashlight was a little shaky, so it made the shadows kind of up there dancing. And then I heard my neighbor's daughter's voice going, "Is Dad all right?" Yes, focus, right? I turned on some lights in the house. It turned out that due to the early sunset, my neighbor had simply gone to bed earlier than usual. I told him I understood I was starting to do the same thing. It was so dark. Maybe it felt darker usual with all the things that are happening in the country. I left that house relieved that my neighbor was okay, but also the lingering images of those dancing Buddha shadows. Now, according to Jungian theory, the personal shadow refers to the unconscious influences in our psyche, which weave in and out of our conscious understanding of our overall self. The personal shadow is often our unrecognized desires and demands, our represented portions of ourselves. In terms of acceptance, the shadow contains those aspects of ourselves we do not and may not even acknowledge. We tend to put them out on other people. According to Thomas More, author of the New York Times bestseller, Care of the Soul, part of our spiritual journey is growing downward into the mystery and the shadow of our inner life, learning about those other parts of ourselves, increasing our self-knowledge, self-awareness through gentle attending, and that is known as shadow work. This work can help create greater authenticity and compassion in our lives, deepen our awareness of our projections on others. At one point, I went to a Quaker retreat center and I spent about 4 months there. And I was doing some shadow work. And part of what they ask is if there's somebody who particularly irritates you, pay closer attention. It's probably something within yourself. So there was a group of us, 12 of us, who were staying there for 4 months. And then there would be these people, they call them travelers, who would come in and just spend 3 or 4 days and be at the retreat with us. And then there was this one guy who just drove me nuts. And I started saying, you got to sit with him every day at lunch and you pay attention. And I'm like, but he's such an arrogant theologian. And I did this, and I soon saw that part of myself that I keep tamped down, like, well, I know that. I know all about that because I know theology and blah, blah, blah. And he gave voice to it, but it was definitely within me. That was my shadow work. I shared that once in Bloomington at I was on a panel for something, and one of the speakers said, so if you ask me to lunch, does that mean you're doing shadow work and what? Ever since then, I've been like, no, not always. And there's different kinds of shadow. Somebody may be somebody you really admire. I was that way with Angelou, and then I had this like, almost like, would you like to go to lunch? And here she was, this normal person. Yes. Do you have some shadow work to do with me? Yes, I do. All of this, our shadow work helps us then to be able to act and react instead of react. When we're having a reaction, that's usually our shadow. When something gets triggered or scared or an admiration where we can't see the person anymore because we built them up in our psyche. Shadow work can cultivate a depth and sacredness in our everyday learning. It can also create a more centered way of doing justice work for those who choose to be out protesting. It is good to know your shadow and know how to be with that so you don't end up completely reacting, that you can come from a place of center as much as possible, right? This morning, I'm going to delve a little deeper into Jung's theory of shadow and More's care of the soul. All work of the soul takes the form of a circle. We go around in it just as we do with our shadow work. The life of the soul as a structure of dreams reveal a continued going over and over. So shadow will often show up in our dream. That's why a lot of people like to do dream work. And I had a dream the other day that I was interviewing, which was really ridiculous. I was interviewing a professor for a place at Indiana University in science. And I'm not a scientist. My family comes from that. And this professor, she had made a piece of artwork that had become very controversial. And it was made with wool. It was incredibly beautiful. It was light. It was like kind of a lot of light and shadow. And she said, well, on the piece underneath, she said, this is composed of 1/3 wool and 2/3 thought. And people didn't like that she had put that the actual thought was part of the composition. And that just made, I woke up going, that's very interesting. Where are our thoughts in here? Are they part of our composition? And it felt like a good part of shadow work. Now, for Jung, there are two kinds of shadow. One consists of the possibilities in life that we may reject because of certain choices we've made. People do that with careers. I did it initially. I went over into a career of law for all the wrong reasons, right? It was more about pleasing people or all types of things. And then I found my way through the shadow into ministry. It may be as simple as playing the piano and somebody made fun of you, and here was a gift you had, and then you bury that, and later you find out. People always think that shadow is always negative, and it's no, it can be something that you just buried because you received a message about it. The person we choose to be, for example, creates a shadow double, who we choose not to be. The compensatory shadow varies from one person to the next. For some people, sex and money are looming shadows that we've not completely dealt with, while for others, they're kind of just simply part of life. Moral purity and responsible living can be shadow aspects for some. Jung also believes there is an absolute shadow, and here's where it gets interesting. Not relative to our life choices and habits. In other words, Jung believed there is an evil in the world and in the human heart. If we don't recognize this, we have a naive attitude that can get us into trouble. Jung thought the soul could benefit by coming to terms with both kinds of shadow, losing some of its naive innocence in the process. Now, that's a theological statement, and we may or may not disagree with it. Do I disagree with that? Yes and no. It's very paradoxical to me. As liberal religious thinkers, we engage with the topic of evil, but how do we do that? Particularly as Unitarian Universalists. You know, a lot of universalism of God is good, God is love, and so, and Unitarians, we are good, right? But what else is there? Are we, as you use, willing to explore our personal theologies of evil? The religious teacher Krishnamurti said, the evil of our times is the loss of consciousness about evil, just trying to ignore it. The following comes from a UU World article that was written by my colleague, Reverend Rosemary Bray McNutt. She said this, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., along with his wife, Coretta Scott King, at one time considered becoming Unitarians, but chose not to, it seems, for several reasons. One, they felt they could not create a mass movement of Black Americans if they were Unitarian. Also, Dr. King had his critique of liberal religion. While he cherished our devotion to the search for truth, its refusal to abandon the best light of reason, Dr. King, after observing the tragedies of history, noted, I came to find that liberalism had been all too sentimental concerning human nature, and that it leaned toward a false idealism. Liberalism, he said, failed to see that reason by itself is little more than an instrument to justify humanity's defensive ways of thinking. In other words, the light of liberalism failed to see its shadow. You know, Jung said, we have it within and then we project it. It's also outside. Evil is not an easy topic, especially with everything we're dealing with in the world today. Because dealing with evil forces us to define our theology of humanity, our individual selves, and the unexpected shadow tendencies of the soul. But it is not easy. That's the whole thing. Because evil just simply is not an easy notion. Alexander Solzhenitsyn remarks, if only it was simple. If only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the human heart of every human being. And who is willing to destroy a piece of their own heart? Now, we know through psychology now that there are sociopaths, psychopaths that somehow get connected from conscience. And there are some amazing people out there that just have a universal love, but most of us are in the muddle in the middle. And that's what this is about. In January 2026, we witnessed 2 American citizens shot and killed by ICE without just cause. Again, not partisan politics. This is about the implosion of our democracy. Jung warned, we have in our naivete forgotten that beneath our world of reason, another lies buried. I do not know what humanity will still have to undergo before it dares to admit this. And here's something else I want to say, because what disturbs me the most is when I read, something online and then all the comments and people are either this or this. They're evil, they should be killed, or they're evil, and it's coming from the left and the right. What I see with a lot of the ICE folks are people who are ill-prepared, ill-trained, scared. So they're powered up because they're scared. And I see that with some of the protesters too. And so when we're looking at what is humanity, who are we, can we see that in others? Because what happens with evil, it begins to happen and we turn on ours and we go right back at it. Now, if somebody came running in here after me right now, would I just sit here and go, let me look at my shadow? No. I would protect myself. I would, do what I needed to do. I think. Or maybe I just stand here. But we need to probe these questions if we're going to heal our own hearts and the hearts of this country. As whether there is an archetypal evil housed in the collective shadow of humanity. In the book, Meeting the Shadow, the hidden parts of our dark side of human nature, the authors state that the shadow is not only an individual problem, groups and nations have a collective shadow. You can feel that developing, which can lead to dangerous activities such as we know, racial discrimination, scapegoating, enemy making, and in the newsletter, there was a young boy talking about what had happened to him on the baseball field. If you have not watched that, please do, because it's happening to our children. They were taunting him, telling him he had to go back to his own country. And the thing is, you have to listen to the voice of the 10-year-old to understand that evil got projected on him. I invite you to do so. Honestly, I think we as a country are still dealing with the shockwaves of the pandemic. I think that something core in us got on alert. I think something core is on alert about the climate crises, even for people who deny it. And the fear that has generated this wave then is being used to manipulate and justify overreaching behaviors and policies that are happening now. Part of Carl Jung's depth psychology theory offers that nothing has such a convincing effect as a lie one invents oneself and believes oneself, or an evil deed or intention whose righteousness one regards as self-evident. Again, this happens on the left and the right. This individual phenomenon becomes more dangerous when the lie is taken seriously by the larger public, because what happens then is scapegoating. We've seen it happen. We're watching it happen. According to Sam Keen, author of Faces of the Enemy, the only safe nations are those who systematically inoculate themselves by a free press and a vocal prophetic minority against the intoxication of divine destinies and sanctified paranoia. A free press and a vocal prophetic minority. I don't see a better place to have that than in your congregation. And you have a free press because you have a newsletter. I'm big on newsletters because it helps all of us kind of stay on the same page. It also tells us those places we can be meeting with each other, where we find the love that is the spirit of this church. As a matter of fact, when I'm often, not often, I've asked to do the charge to the minister when a minister gets ordained. And I always say, okay, the biggest thing, you prepare yourself, because this is the biggest thing I've learned in ministry. So disillusioned when I found this. Not everybody reads the newsletter. No! It's sad, but it's true. So if you remember anything about this, read your newsletter, go through it. There is such, and you guys have a good one. I'm not kidding. And I was just sharing this with Sherry. It wasn't like, I didn't know she was going to mention it today. I was like, wow, that is just really good. It's got good stuff in it. I felt my cup full. I felt like I'd been to church. And so it is there. So where does all of this leave us as Unitarian Universalists living here now in this nation, where there appears to be preemptive war making going on, so much happening environmentally, the thwarting of principles we hold dear as Unitarian Universalists, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. So, as I said, that means protesters, that means ICE, that means, what does that mean then? What does that mean? That's a deep question. I say we have to take care of our soul, not to fall in the pattern of fear-based reactions, but to have that kind of courage that Maya Angelou talks about. And if you think about her, just her eyes, you see that type of courage. It is a truth speaker. In an article in the Baltimore Chronicle, it was stated, if we solidify a particular leader as being evil and react with righteous indignation, we are guilty of the very same thing we are accusing of that leader. The wickedness of others becomes our wickedness because it kindles something evil in our own hearts. And I know a lot of people struggle with that. I hate so-and-so. So what do? You care for your soul. You care for your congregation. You become spiritual warriors, speaking your truth, listening to truth as others are seeing it, discerning when to take a stand, listening to how you're blaming, all of those things. We're human, we do this. I do it, we do it. I just try to stay aware. And we soften into those parts of us that we may not like all the time. I wanted to end with two particular pieces. Earlier, I talked to Rosemary Bray McNatt. She's the one who, Reverend UU minister, who had interviewed Coretta Scott King. And she said this: I had been a Unitarian Universalist for 8 or 9 years when I moved to Detroit, Michigan. We have a Detroit, Michigander here. She said, I was participating in a service at the UU Detroit Church, and as part of my presentation, I had talked about God that morning. An older woman approached me during the coffee hour later that morning to inform me that as UUs, we had given up the notion of God. She demanded to know how I, as an African-American woman, could possibly talk about God when that same reprehensible Christian concept had been used to justify slavery. Rosemary said I was dumbfounded by her vehemence, but not too shocked to remind her that it was that same tradition's God, more particularly a just and loving God, whose movement was forever toward justice and freedom and wholeness, that had inspired much of the anti-slavery movement and indeed most of the major reform movements of the 19th century. That we as Unitarian Universalists are so eager to claim. And she said, I informed her that I was just as much a Unitarian Universalist as she would, and I was not going to give up my notion of God. So you see that projection on another that happened with her. And you also saw a woman finding her own truth. As Unitarian Universalists, we're here. There are some believers in God, some not, and also just a lot of us trying to find a definition of what that could really be. What is spirit? What is God? What love? What is love is flowing through the universe? Is there evil? We're dealing with these all the times, and we do that as a community. I'm going to leave you with a quote from your newsletter. Now, my ancestors on both sides were Quakers. And so there was a bit in there by Philip Gully. Now, I don't know if he was originally Hoosier. Do you know if Philip Gully grew up? Yep. Hoosier Philip Gully. He's just, I've met him. He's a wonderful person. I think Sherry may have sent this into the newsletter. He begins by saying this: the writer Anais Nin wrote, life shrinks or expands in proportion with one's courage. And Philip says, so friends, be brave and go forth in good cheer. Awaken each morning determined to pop the balloons of pomposity and pretensions. It is the work of saints to counter ugliness with laughter, to oppose tyranny with our joy, to every day adorn ourselves with happiness and hope until cruelty is exhausted. And I think that's shadow work. I think all of this is. And tomorrow, Puxatani Phil will tell us about the rest of the weather. That great prognosticator. I did see that PETA, I don't know how, see, I feel very different about this. They want to replace Puxatani Phil because they think it's cruel to hold him up like that with a type of like electronic version of him, like a holograph. And I was just thinking, well, I think I'm gonna put my energies elsewhere. And, and I'm telling you, Puxatani Phil does not look like he's being abused too much. He's a nice, fat little groundhog, and I think he's gonna be okay. With that thought on shadow. Thank you. I do want to say one more word about Spirit of Life and why I asked to have that sung this morning. I may have shared this before with you, but that was written by Carolyn McDade. And as the story goes, she had been out working for social justice, and there was something major going on at the time when she wrote this. And she really came home and just said, I don't know if I can do this anymore. I'm tired. This is hard, scary. And she sat down at the piano, and eventually this is what came forth, Spirit of Life. So whatever you're doing in life, I hope you can take the words from that hymn with you as well. Good day to fly, good day to die, good day to stand in our long, tall bodies, go deep into the earth. And Spirit of Life, come unto me. Roots hold me close and wings set me free. So may it be for you. So may it be for me. So may it be for all of us. Amen.